So my guest speaker tonight is, I used to intern at a church, and he was one of my students. But when I was a senior in high school, he was a freshman in high school, and I got to pick on him quite a bit, especially because he was a freshman. And he was known in the marching band community of that school of not knowing his sets, not knowing where he was supposed to be on the field. It was a whole mess, and I was like, unfortunately, I know that kid. But I met him when he was in 8th grade. That's when I first started coming back to church. And I'm like, I come back to church, and this annoying kid is here? But supposedly I was like a role model to him. I guess I was OG. I wore my drumline jacket to church every week because I thought it made me look cool. That was me back in high school. I thought that just made me look cool. And I was like, oh, I'm the drumline captain. Threw that around quite a bit. But tonight, his name is Josh Beauchamp. It took me a long time to figure out how to say that name. You can come on up, Josh. Well, I'm super excited to have him here. He's called into ministry. He's going to go to, come on. He's going to go to Tyler Junior College for 2 years, get an Associates of Business, correct? And then he's going to somewhat find a ministry school afterwards, and his calling is in the ministry. So I brought him here tonight. I've already heard his message. It's going to be powerful and impactful, and I can't wait for you all to hear it.
Thank you, Hunter. What is up, Revive students? How are you guys doing tonight? Good. That's awesome. Well, my name is Josh Beauchamp, and like he said, I'm really excited to be here. I remember the first time Hunter spoke. That was fun. He was yelling and screaming, and he didn't know how to keep the microphone away from his face, so it was really loud. But speaking of which, we get really excited in church whenever we see first-time guests, whenever we hear guest speakers. And sometimes we often forget about the people who stay. And so real quick, I want you guys to show your love for Pastor Hunter. Clap, go. Make him feel some love, give him some love. This guy, I've heard his heart about you guys, I've heard his heart about youth. He really wants to see revival, and he is really somebody that's going to treat y'all good, and you guys really got a good student, or pastor. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here, and my first let's go ahead and open our Bibles to Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And so I'll give you guys a second to pull that up. It's also on the screen behind me. It's all set out of the way so you guys can see it. All right, I'll just go ahead and start reading. Anyway, so when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please come put your hand on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up from behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around into the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowded against you," the disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. But then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why are all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he told the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Now, since that was a long passage of scripture, I'm going to go ahead and kind of take it down for you guys and kind of give you a little bit of background on it. So you have Jesus, who he just came from sending demons into pigs. He came across the Sea of Galilee, and he was met by a large crowd, as he often was, because, well, he's Jesus. And so Jesus is met by this guy named Jairus, who's a synagogue leader, and he's like, "Jesus, my daughter is dead or dying. Please come help." So Jesus walks with Jairus, and on the way there, they are met by this woman who the Bible says has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. And so she touches his cloak, and Jesus is like, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "Jesus, you're with a lot of people, so people are touching you." But Jesus is really certain that something very specific happened because he felt power go out of him. And the woman was like, "Jesus, it's me, and I'm sorry," and everything. And Jesus is like, "Go in peace, you're healed." So then they make it to Jairus' house, and somebody's like, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother Jesus anymore?" And Jesus is like, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And so he goes into the house, and he heals Jairus' daughter. That's a really awesome story, and it's a really great passage of Scripture, and there are 3 parts in this story that I want to unpack. The first part is Mark 5:22, and it says Jairus fell on his feet. You see, Jairus was a synagogue leader. But before I go into that, I want you guys to understand what the synagogue leader did. And according to Oxford Bible Studies, the synagogue leader was in charge of looking after the building, its contents, and the arrangements for worship. So apparently, the synagogue leader was kind of like the landlord. He looked after the building and made sure everything was fine and dandy. But why is knowing this important? Well, I think it's safe to say that a person like Jairus was pretty well respected among the people. Not only that, but he was probably pretty wealthy and had a lot of connections. He probably had the ability to go and find the best doctors and physicians to help his daughter. Instead, the Bible tells us that he went at Jesus' feet and fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. There is something so significant about this action. Jairus, even with his power and authority, knelt at the feet of Jesus. Jairus understood the power and authority of Christ. Before God can truly work in our lives, we have to let go. Before his daughter could be healed, Jairus had to first take the action of kneeling before Jesus. God could be wanting to change the circumstances in your family, your friends, or in you personally. But you personally have to humble yourself and ask God. It says that Jairus pleaded earnestly with him. Do you know what earnestly means? It means with sincere and intense conviction. Jairus was passionate about his daughter being healed. He could have gave up or gone up to Jesus and be like, "Yo, Jesus, please heal my daughter." But instead, the Bible says that he got down on his knees and was like, "Jesus, my daughter is dying. Please heal her." God doesn't want us to be passive Christians where we're just kind of going through the motions and everything and just seeming like everything's all good. He wants us to be passionate. He wants us to be people who are constantly pursuing him. He wants people who are fighting the fight of faith daily. He wants people who will get down on their knees and earnestly pray and go after what they need. Which are you? So then the second part I want to unpack is Mark 5:28, which says, "If I just touch his clothes." So in the middle of Jesus making his way to Jairus' house, this woman, who the Bible says has been subject to bleeding for 12 years, touches his cloak. What I love about this is the mindset of the woman. Scripture says that she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. I think that far too often we as Christians think that faith is something that is unattainable. Like Pastor Hunter saying no to a burrito. But faith is not like this, friends. Jesus said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. The woman understood this perfectly. She did not have to make a big deal or stop Jesus from what he was already doing. She just had the faith to touch his clothes, and she was healed. What are the circumstances in your life where you need to touch Jesus' clothes? The woman did not let anything around her stop her from chasing Jesus. She had a need and did what she needed to do in order to see that need healed. The last piece I want to unpack is Mark 5:35. They made it to Jairus' house, and then somebody comes and says, why bother the teacher anymore? We come to the end of the story. Jesus has made it to Jairus' house and is ready to heal his daughter. Suddenly, a man came up to Jairus and tells him, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Have you been believing and praying for something so much, and people come along and tell you, or talk you down? We've all been there. You are believing for God to use you to bring your friend to Christ, and then the enemy whispers in your ear, you can't do it. You're just a kid. This is too big for you. This is what Jairus is experiencing right now. His faith is being tested. And in this moment, what happens? Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. See, I believe God is speaking that over everybody tonight. No matter what situation you are facing, no matter what mountain is in your way, do not be afraid, just believe. Jesus gave Jairus' faith a boost in a moment where that situation was seemingly hopeless. Jesus told Jairus, if you just have faith and trust me, everything will be okay. So we've talked about how the fight of faith is applied in the story. But how do we apply the fight of faith? And I have a 3-step plan. Number 1, we surrender. Looking at Jairus, before any healing could take place, he had to first take on the mindset of humility. He had to surrender and humble himself at the feet of Jesus. In the same way, if we want God to do something extraordinary in our lives, we have to surrender. 1 Peter 5, verses 6 through 10 say, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kind of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And you have suffered a little while. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of grace, who has called you into his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. See, there has to be a point where you realize that you can't keep fighting anymore, or by yourself. And in this moment, you turn to Jesus and give it all to him. And through that, you will see God reveal himself to you in whatever situation you're facing. My second point is we take a step. The woman in this story had 2 choices. She could have stayed in the crowd, hiding herself, and never encountering Jesus because of her fear. Or she could have done what she did and became healed. See, I imagine that this decision was hard for her. She risked being ridiculed, shunned, and ignored because of her situation. I feel like a lot of us can relate to the woman in this respect. We want God to move, whether it's in our friends, our school, or our city, yet far too often we are too scared because of our own fear. And I think that's what holds us back. Whether it's God, I can't get my friends saved because they will never listen to me. Or God, I want to serve, but I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected. Or God, I want to lead a small group or Bible study, but I'm scared people will figure out my past. Did you know that Moses dealt with the same issue? God told him to free the Israelites out of Egypt, and he was like, God, I can't speak well. But then what happens? Moses trusts God. He takes a step, and then another step, and then another step, and then all of a sudden he's leading the Israelites out of Egypt. God has a great and mighty call for all of you. And all that he asks of you is that you take a step of faith and trust him. So now my third point, we surrender, we trust God, or take a step, and now we trust God. That's my third point. Jairus' situation seemed hopeless once Jesus arrived at his house. Immediately, he is met with someone saying, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Have you ever had a moment where your situation seemed hopeless? Like, no matter what you did, it was never going to turn around. We all have those moments. And these are often the moments where we have to fight the hardest. And one of the best tools we have is right here, the Bible, or as he's known to his friends, the sword of the Spirit. There is power in this book, power to speak into whatever situation you are facing. I can't recall the amount of times that I've been down or in a funk or just needing some encouragement, and I popped open the Bible, and God has been able to speak to me in whatever way that I needed it. I love what God tells the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 41, verses 10 through 13. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. All who rage against you will surely be ashamed and disgraced, and those who oppose you will be as nothing and perish. Though you search for your enemies, you will not find them. Those who wage war against you will be as nothing at all. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear. I will help you. God will honor your faithfulness in whatever season of life you're facing. And even though your situation may seem bleak, God is always with you, and there is nothing that you can do to change that. So we've talked about how the fight of faith applies in the story. We've talked about how to fight the fight of faith, but how do we apply this practically? And to explain this to you guys, I have a little bit of a story. So about a year ago, I entered into this relationship with a very godly woman who was a good friend of mine. I believed that this relationship was going to last a while, and I was like praying and thanking God, like, God, thank you for this relationship. Thank you for finally giving me what I've been praying for. Long story short, this relationship, it lasted like a month and a half. And I was left hurt and broken, and I was just like, God, why did you put me into this if this was going to be the result? And I had two choices here. I could have either taken that pain and that hurt and walked into another relationship just to try to heal what had been broken from a last relationship, or I could have turned to God and just been like, God, I'm trusting you with this. And that's what I ended up doing. I remember there was one night I was praying, and I was like, God, I may not understand why you're having me go through this, but I'm going to trust that your ways are higher than my ways. I'm going to trust in your intended purpose. This was all part of your plan, and I believe that you're going to make the best out of this situation. And I have never looked back. So here's what I want to do to close. See, there are three groups of people that I want to talk to tonight. And if you fall under any of these, I want you to come up here when I say go. Number one, you've been fighting on your own, and you just need to surrender your situation to God. You're like Jairus. You need to surrender to God, and you need to be like, Jesus, help me with whatever situation I'm facing. Number two, you are wanting God to do something miraculous in your life, and you need courage to take a step. You're like the woman, and you're believing that God wants to do something in your life. But you now have to take the step, and you need the courage to take that step. Or number three, you are going through a rough season and having a hard time trusting God. You're like Jairus, and people are coming at you and telling you, hypothetically, your daughter is dead. Why bother Jesus anymore? And you just need some encouragement and strength. You know, all three of these are connected. When you surrender, you start trusting God, and He will require you to take a step. This is all connected. And if any of this resonates with you, come down here when I say go. Ready? Go.
As we take this time of prayer and our altar, just think about what he said. The fight for faith. That's one of the most struggles we have in our life is our faith. We've been talking about faith a lot here just in the student ministry quite often. I really think God's trying to show us something. If we did a whole series on faith last month, and then every single week this week we talked about faith this month, what is God trying to talk to us as a student ministry? We've had guest speakers, we've had multiple people I've done multiple counselors and mentors in my life, other pastors say, for fighting for faith. And I really think that that's something that we got to take on in this new season. So I'm super excited that Josh came. He's praying right now with some people. But I want to thank everyone who joined us online. Connect with us. Join us every week, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. We're super excited that you watched us online this week. And we're ready to make an impact across the world.